The black dog. When I was younger, I'd say 15 or 16, I'm almost convinced I came face to face with something evil in a dream. My parents are divorced and have been for a long while now, and I'd go back and forth between their care with my sister. My mom's house was always fine, but my dad's basement apartment had this weird, oppressive atmosphere I couldn't shake. And the woman he was renting from, who lived above, was incredibly strange. I'd hear organ music or a weird droning from upstairs past midnight regularly, and there was always people coming in and out of her house. I'd had weird dreams and nightmares at my dad's place before, but this was something else. What I am about to describe to you still raises the hair on my arms, even now that many years have passed. Um, we wake up by me doing something miserable. The dream began with what I thought at the time was me waking up in a cold sweat from another nightmare, and the apartment was dead silent. This was weird to me because when I looked at the clock by my bedside, it was only a bit past midnight, and my father was usually up playing guitar or on the computer at that time. This was my first sign something wasn't right. My second was when I looked at the floor of my room and found something odd. The light filtering in from outside through my window was of bright red. I became aware of a panting noise then and looked over to where my bedroom door was slightly ajar. That same red light coming from behind it. Felt myself stiffen in fear, and I couldn't move as I watched my door open further, pushed by the snout of a large black dog that walked in and stood by my bedside. The dog had shining white eyes and appeared to be half wolf. Its tongue hung out of its mouth and dripped saliva as it looked at me. In an expressionless baritone voice, that dog spoke directly into my head and said, "I am the devil. Follow me." What I mean by this is that the dog's jaw never moved while communicating this to me. I just looked in its eyes and those words came to me. I felt a compulsion to leave the bed and follow even though I was terrified, so I stood and walked behind the black dog as it left my room and entered the kitchen/dining room. As we left my room, I felt my stomach twist as the air temperature noticeably dropped. My mom and dad, who weren't speaking at the time, along with my sister, my stepfather, and my stepmother, who had never met, were all seated at the dinner table facing each other wordlessly with empty plates in front of them. The light above the dinner table bathed them all in the same red light that streamed through the window in my bedroom. The black dog turned to face me and said, "Welcome." Well, after Dad, whoa. Fast forward a few days, long enough for my kids to figure out I wasn't going to get their asses back tomorrow and let some guy drag me into hell with him while I remained upset with him. At that point, I woke up for real and discovered the time was actually 3 a.m. It's safe to say I didn't sleep for the rest of that night and didn't tell anyone about that nightmare until almost a month after I had it. Maybe a year after that, I found a cult in the Yosemite woods. Every summer I go camping in Yosemite with my cousins. In every trip, we spend a night stargazing. There's a village with markets and restaurants down the road from the campsites, and across the road from the campsites and across the road from the village is a large field of tall grass with a winding, narrow boardwalk that leads deep into the field. Imagine a boardwalk dock that reaches out into a bay. But instead of open water, it's a field surrounded by tile. On the back is a stone driveway. It's a beautiful place. This is where we usually sit to watch the stars. This night of stargazing was uneventful as the sky was cloudy that night and we weren't able to see the stars at all, so we just sat and smoked for a bit. One of my cousins noticed a light deep within the woods that was still and bright. He pointed it out because he thought it was odd that there was a light in that direction to begin with, as that area of woods had no buildings or campsites, which meant that there shouldn't be people in that area as it was very late by this time. We moved closer towards that area of the woods along the boardwalk and was able to see that the light was twinkling. It looked as though the light came from a flame. It's strict in the rules of any wooded national park that you shouldn't light flames in areas that don't have a designated fire pit. My cousin was certain that where the light was coming from was empty and open woods, and it was well out of distance from any campsites. Roads and housing. And the flame must have been very deep into the woods because no matter how close we got along the boardwalk, the light wasn't becoming any more clear to make out. We stopped and we heard commotion, as though a large group of people were there. We assumed that there must have been a party going on until we heard chanting. It started as loud party sounds, but slowly turned into synchronized whooping and then howling. Not like a wolf howl, but more like harmonized groans and wailing. The voices became more guttural and projected almost as though the people making them were in pain or misery. The sounds we heard were no longer ignorable, and it was obvious something odd was happening in those woods. Before I knew it, I was the only one closest to the end of the boardwalk when I turned around and saw all my cousins stayed back, huddled far behind me. Staring with me into the trees, my heart was racing, and all there was to see was that light twinkling deep in the dark. The faint sounds of wailing was enough to know that whatever was going on around that light wasn't a party. The next morning, my cousins and I ventured into the woods in the general direction of where we saw the light, and sure enough, it was empty woods in every direction for an acre or two. No sign of camps or cabins. The only evidence of any people being there was a large patch of dirt and pine needles where we found masses of bare footprints left in the mud and soil. So the next morning, we decided to report disappearances. We saw flame deep in the forest where no people should be, that late at night, where there was no buildings or campsites. Mind you, there's bears in these woods, and you could get kicked out of the park for endangering and pestering the wildlife. We heard loud harmonized wailing and chanting coming from the direction of the light. The next morning, we see a large mass of bare footprints in the soil where we could see the boardwalk we were standing on, far past the trees behind